Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something quite heavy. The recent terrorist attack in Pahalgam's Bizaran Valley, the place they call India's mini Switzerland.
Yes, it's a truly awful event, a terrible loss of life.
Absolutely. And our main source for this discussion is largely a YouTube transcript from Dhruv. It goes into quite a bit of detail about what happened and, importantly, raises some pretty critical questions.
Right, questions about the attack itself, but also the bigger picture, security, intelligence, the context of terrorism in India.
Exactly. So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is really to unpack the facts as presented in the source, understand what happened in Pahalgam, the immediate aftermath, and dig into those questions about intelligence failures, security readiness, the whole thing.
And we should state up front, this is obviously a very sensitive topic. We're aiming for an impartial look, focusing on understanding the information we have from the source material.
Definitely. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What actually happened there in Pahalgam?
Yeah. So the attack was in the Bizaran Valley. It's pretty high up, and access is basically by foot, trekking, or you can hire mules to get up there.
Not exactly easy to get to.
Not at all. And the casualties were, well, devastating. The reports say at least 26 people killed, all men, and another 17 injured.
And the victims, they were from all over, weren't they? Tourists, mostly.
Mostly tourists, yeah. The breakdown reported is 24 Hindus, one Muslim who is actually a local mule handler, Syed Adil Hussain Shah, and one Christian victim. People like Niraj Udwani from Jaipur, visiting from the UAE, Sudeep Nupani from Nepal, just people on holiday.
And the individual stories that have come out, just heartbreaking. There was an IAF corporal, Taj Haliang from Arunachal Pradesh.
Yes, and Manish Ranjan, an IB section officer. He was apparently traveling from Bihar with his family using his leave travel concession.
And then the Indian Navy Lieutenant, Vinay Narwal, from Haryana, I believe.
That's right. And the circumstances were particularly awful. He'd just gotten married like 6 days before on his honeymoon.
And there was that detail. The transcript mentions an attacker allegedly commenting he doesn't look Muslim before shooting him.
Yes, that specific chilling detail was reported. It's incredibly disturbing.
And there's the account of Asavari from Pune, an HR professional.
Uh-huh. Her story involved her father reportedly being shot after he couldn't recite Islamic verses. But then, local mule handlers apparently helped her and her family get to safety.
It shows, incredible bravery from those local people in the middle of horror.
Absolutely. The source also mentions the Indian Army arrived for rescue ops about 20 minutes after the shooting started.
Okay, and who claimed they did this?
The claim of responsibility came from a group called TRF, the Resistant Front.
TRF. I've heard of them. Aren't they linked to Lashkar-e-Taiba?
That's how they're described, yeah. Sort of a shadow group for LAUT, which is, the Pakistan-based terror outfit. And it's worth noting, TRF itself was declared a terrorist organization under the UAPA, India's anti-terror law, about 2 years ago.
So they were already on the radar. Any specific individuals suspected?
Well, there's suspicion about a Lashkar commander, Saifullah Kazuri, possibly being involved.
And the actual attackers on the ground.
The initial probe, according to the source, suggests maybe 4 to 6 terrorists. The J&K police released sketches of 3 men based on eyewitness accounts who they believe are Pakistani nationals.
Okay.
But there's another layer. Government sources apparently suspect 2 Kashmiri youths were also involved, Adil Guri from Anantnag and Asan from Pulwama.
Youth who had gone to Pakistan.
Allegedly, yes.
Yeah.
The story is they went across the border back in 2018 and might have recently infiltrated back into India. And there were apparently prior intelligence reports about their movements.
Right. That brings us to a really crucial point, the intelligence, the Times of India report you mentioned.
Yeah, citing sources saying there was intel back in April about terrorists potentially scoping out hotels in that area.
Which inevitably leads to the question, if there was intel, how could this still happen? And this feels disturbingly familiar, doesn't it? It kind of echoes the questions around the Pulwama attack.
It really does. That parallel is quite stark in the source material. Yeah. Remember, after Pulwama, the government stated pretty clearly, I think it was G. Kishan Reddy in the Rajya Sabha, June 2019, that there was no intelligence failure.
Right. I remember that denial.
But then Frontline magazine did an investigation, and they reported finding evidence of like 11 intelligence inputs between early January and February 13th, 2019, right before the attack, warning about a possible Kisas attack.
Kisas meaning revenge.
Exactly, a revenge attack. And these weren't vague warnings either, according to Frontline.
The transcript mentions specific intel about the planner, Mudassir Ahmad Khan.
Yes. Very specific. An input from January 24th, 2019, reportedly mentioned Mudasir planning a Fedayeen, a suicide attack, and linked him to Adil Ahmad Dar's group. Dar was the bomber.
Okay.
Then the very next day, January 25th, another input allegedly pinpointed Mudasir's location with 4 foreign militants planning an attack near Pulwama in Awantipora or Pampur.
And Mudasir wasn't unknown, was he? He had a history.
Definitely not unknown. He was linked to a CRPF camp attack back in 2017. He was a known entity.
And the warnings kept coming, right up until the day before.
Apparently so. The source mentions a top-secret matter most urgent input on February 12th. It was about a specific Twitter handle supposedly run by Jaish-e-Mohammed handlers.
Jaish-e-Mohammed, the group Dar belonged to.
Right. And this handle was hinting at IED blasts targeting security forces. It even mentioned a demo video, apparently. Then a similar final warning reportedly came on February 13th, the day before the bombing.
So you have all these reported warnings. But then there was that controversial decision about moving the troops, wasn't there?
Yes. The transcript highlights that heavily. The fact that a request to airlift over 2,500 soldiers was reportedly turned down.
And instead they were sent in that massive road convoy, 78 vehicles.
Exactly. A decision that a former CRPF Inspector General later publicly slammed as technically wrong.
So when you put it all together, the reported intel before Pulwama, and now reports of intel before Pahalgam, it really begs the question, why aren't these warnings leading to prevention?
It's the core question, isn't it? How do these attacks keep happening if there's prior information floating around?
And, where are these groups getting the weapons, the ammunition?
That's a huge part of it. The source points out, look, border security is a central government responsibility, right? The BSF falls under them. So questions arise about how effective border controls are at stopping weapons and militants coming in.
And the ultimate responsibility for border security and just general public safety. The transcript kind of lays that at the feet of the Prime Minister.
It does raise that point. And it also brings up the Prime Minister's statement back in December 2016 after demonetization. Remember, he claimed it had broken the back of terrorism.
I do remember that claim. How does that square with what's happened since?
Well, the source then lists a whole series of major attacks in J&K after demonetization. Nagrota Army Base in late 2016.
The Amarath Yatra attack in 2017.
Sunjwan Military Station, Feb 2018. Pulwama, Feb 2019.
Jammu bus stand grenade attack, March 2019. Awantipora, June 2019.
Then the attacks in Poonch and Rajouri more recently in 2023-2024.
And now Pahalgam, 2025. It's a long and grim list.
It certainly makes you question that initial claim about demonetization's impact on terror funding, doesn't it? Which leads the source to ask, why isn't the mainstream media asking tougher questions about these repeated security lapses and the government's started successes?
That's a really interesting point the transcript makes. It compares the current media climate to, say, pre-2014, even mentioning films like A Wednesday, which directly challenged the government on terrorism.
And it contrasts the lack of accountability now, perhaps, with past instances. Like after the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, you had resignations, Home Minister Shivraj Patil, Maharashtra CM Vilas Rao Deshmukh. They stepped down.
Is that kind of accountability missing now? Is that the suggestion?
The transcript seems to imply that, yeah. And it points to some, frankly, quite concerning media narratives, like Arnab Goswami reportedly blaming the Supreme Court for the Pahalgam attack, linking it to the Article 370 decision.
Which seems like a huge leap. And wasn't there that leaked WhatsApp chat of his from after Pulwama?
Yes, the source brings that up too. Apparently celebrating the high TV ratings from the attack coverage, it raises serious questions about priorities ratings versus the human tragedy and security failures.
And they mentioned an Ajtak reporter being cut off.
Yeah, apparently while trying to ask questions on the ground in Pahalgam about the lack of security. These examples, taken together, suggest a media environment where maybe scrutinizing the official line on security is, well, difficult.
Even if the public is asking questions. The source mentioned even children were questioning things after Pahalgam.
It did. It suggests a disconnect, perhaps, between the public's desire for answers and accountability and what's being prominently discussed in some media circles.
Okay, the deep dive also touched on the security forces themselves. Personnel shortages in the Army.
Yes, that's a significant point. Citing a Defense Ministry report to Parliament, the transcript mentions a shortfall of around 8,400 officers and a huge number of soldiers, over 92,400.
Wow, that's substantial. Any reason given?
Well, one report cited from The Telegraph in 2022 suggested the halt in recruitment during the COVID pandemic was a major factor.
And on top of that, There are plans to reduce the army size further.
That's also mentioned, yeah. A plan to cut strength by about 200,000 personnel over the next 3 years. Officially, it's termed rationalizing troop strength.
Rationalizing.
But the source notes speculation that it might be driven by a desire to cut salary and pension costs, which, raises questions about whether this could impact readiness.
And this ties back to the victims' families, doesn't it? Lieutenant Vinay Narwal's sister.
Right. Her reported statement was devastating, saying he was alive for maybe an hour and a half after being shot, and maybe, just maybe, could have been saved if the army response had been quicker or if there was more presence there.
And she contrasted that with VIP security.
She did, yeah. Pointing out the massive security details politicians get compared to the situation faced by ordinary citizens or even soldiers in vulnerable areas.
That perception of unequal security.
Yeah.
It seems quite strong. The transcript mentioned Kashmiri Pandits protesting about security, too.
Uh-huh. And it notes that those protests didn't seem to get major media attention. This is then contrasted, in the source, with the high-level Z-plus security given to billionaires like Mukesh Ambani.
NSG commandos, the works.
Right, and Y-plus or Z-plus for many other VIPs. It forces you to ask, where are the priorities when it comes to allocating security resources? Are ordinary citizens being adequately protected?
The source also brings up issues with police forces being overworked, maybe undertrained, and a general sense of law and order deteriorating.
It touches on those points, yes. Contributing to this feeling that while assurances are given after attacks, like the Home Minister saying the Pahalgam perpetrators won't be spared, the bigger issue is prevention.
How do you assure the average person they're safe? The transcript uses the example of the Maharashtra CM assuring security for Salman Khan.
Right, after threats against him. While the general public might feel less secure after incidents like Pahalgam, it highlights that disparity again.
This brings us to the media and political narratives again, the critique of some pro-government media.
Yeah, the source accuses some outlets of spinning failures or problems into achievements. It gives alleged examples of headlines after the PM's Saudi trip that seemed perhaps overly positive or detached from other realities.
But on the other side, there was strong condemnation of the Pahalgam attack within Kashmir itself.
Absolutely. The transcript mentions former CM Omar Abdullah condemning it, and widespread shutdowns, unity marches, candlelight vigils organized by Kashmiris, a strong local rejection of the violence.
And condemnation from Muslim groups across India.
Yes, very clearly. Groups like Jamaat Ulama-e-Hind, the All India Imam organization, they spoke out strongly, as did several Muslim-majority countries. And, importantly, many individual Indian Muslims used social media to express solidarity and call for unity.
The message being, don't let terrorists divide us along religious lines.
Precisely. That this is exactly what terrorists want, to create that polarization.
But then, there was that social media post from BJP Chhattisgarh. That caused quite a stir, didn't it?
It did. The transcript describes it as deeply problematic. It reportedly framed the tragedy in religious terms. They asked for the religion, not the caste, we'll remember, which drew massive criticism for being insensitive and, well, potentially using the tragedy for political points.
Critics saw it as playing into the very Hindu versus Muslim narrative that terrorists try to exploit.
Exactly. The source argues that this kind of rhetoric, sadly, aligns with the goals of terrorists spreading religious hatred. It also links this to broader narratives that have gained traction post-2014, portraying Hindus as being in perpetual danger.
And conspiracy theories like Ghazwe Hind.
Right, that false narrative about a supposed plot for Islamic conquest of India. The source discusses how these fear-based narratives circulate, but it's also careful to acknowledge that, yes, hateful elements exist within parts of the Muslim community too. It's not a one-sided issue.
So what's the core message coming out of the source material here, amidst all this?
I think the fundamental call is for unity. For ordinary Indians, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, everyone, across all castes and regions to stand together against violence. No matter who perpetrates it, no matter the claimed motive, religion, caste, language, whatever.
Condemn all violence, basically. Pahalgam, Palestine, caste atrocities.
Yes, the message is, don't fall for the us versus them trap. Don't let anyone provoke you into hatred based on these divisions.
Instead, focus on
demanding justice.
Yeah.
Demanding that criminals and terrorists, whoever they are, face consequences. And demanding that as citizens, we stay united to build peace and progress for everyone, not letting ourselves be divided.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. Key takeaways from this deep dive, based on the source. We've looked at the awful details of the Pahalgam attack itself.
We've seen the really worrying parallels drawn with Pulwama, especially regarding the questions about prior intelligence and whether security measures were adequate.
We've touched upon the role of the media, the political narratives that swirl around these events, sometimes in quite problematic ways.
And the underlying issues of accountability, resource allocation for security forces, and the need for public safety assurance.
It really underscores the need for critical thinking, doesn't it? For all of us to question the narratives we're presented with after events like this.
Absolutely essential. Don't just accept the first explanation or the loudest voice. Dig deeper.
And maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. When these tragedies happen and the focus immediately goes to blaming this group or that failure, how might that intense, often divisive focus actually distract us?
Distract us from looking at the deeper, maybe more complex systemic problems. Insecurity in society, in how we prevent radicalization, how we ensure genuine safety for all citizens.
Exactly. Could the focus on immediate blame sometimes prevent us from addressing the root causes? And what's our role as individuals in pushing for that broader conversation, for unity, instead of getting caught up in the cycle of division?
Something important to reflect on, definitely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive